Welcome to Translation Confidential. This is Peter Argondizzo and Patrick Daley, and here we are again today. We are episode 133 with why translation services are essential for diverse workforces. Yeah, I know diversity is a bad word these days. We're going to talk about it anyway.
Can't say the D word.
We're saying it. Diversity. We're going to talk about it. It's all good. But let's get started with a news story. Patrick, what have you got?
Yeah, this week we're coming from The Verge. Sorry, Slater, not this week. We found another one. And it is an article titled Google's AI Podcast Maker is now available in over 50 languages. So basically, it's an AI tool that works in their notebook LM. And it basically takes a bunch of text and converts it into a podcast for you, is my understanding from the very brief demo that I've seen here. So very interesting that that's available in 50 languages. I know we've talked time and again about the old Google Translate for websites functionality and how dicey that was in terms of the quality of the outputs there. So very curious to see how the outputs of this tool, how they hold up quality wise. In the article, it does say Google said that this is an early look at what's possible for this feature. So it seems like they're hedging their bets a little bit with that statement, if I'm reading between the lines. But I think we'll see more and more things as time goes on, and with AI adoption becoming much more prevalent, of that kind of spilling into different languages, as opposed to, I feel like, at least in my day-to-day and universe, I see a lot happening in English, but I've got to imagine that AI is progressing rapidly in other languages as well.
I mean, like our podcast is so exciting because the two of us are here speaking, right, Patrick? I mean, this is why your mom tunes in every week. It's to listen to you and me. She doesn't want to listen to some automaton from Google. You know what's funny about this? I think they missed the mark. Like if we're thinking about a use case, because my mind always goes to use cases, I guess. Like I was thinking, what would be cool is, if you use like deep research, right? You say, okay, Patrick, in your job, my job, whatever, a new topic comes up and you're like, wow, I really need to figure this out. I need to learn more about it. You do a deep research prompt. Sometimes when you do the deep research prompts, whether it's in chat or I'm sure it's the same in Gemini, I'm not as well versed in Gemini, but you get a lot of content. And I'm thinking now, what would be cool is if you say you hit the research on the go button and it generates an audio file that then you jump into your car because you have a long drive and you listen to it. And if it's like in a podcast format, it might be somewhat more interesting than hearing the automaton just read to you. So like I could see that as a use case, but I don't like, are people going to listen? I don't think people are going to listen. Maybe they are more interesting than you and I. I don't know, Patrick.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard a lot of people saying they use AI tools. They'll use the speech to text functionality just to like get things written down faster, as opposed to typing it out. Like they'll just speak into their phone or
Sure.
computer. So I think like that in any sense with AI is like, it's pretty slick that you can just speak and something will type it out for you. Like that's pretty cool, but I don't know how useful it is in the reverse direction, I guess.
Yeah, as an entertainment value, I'm not sure. To be seen, but I bet if we see that research on the go thing, I'll post my address and Google can send me a check.
Yeah, you heard it here first. Patent pending, TM.
Absolutely. So, all right, let's get rolling, Patrick. So, why are we talking about this? I mean, I think in our work, Patrick, in the former work that you used to do, but I know you still have an opinion on it, and that's why you're here. We should talk a little bit about why this is important. I mean, why are translation services so important when it comes to engaging the workforce? And I think, there's some good stats that we were able to discover. And I found this one from Forbes. It says that 65% of executives report that language barriers between managers and employees in diverse workforces lead to miscommunication and inefficiencies. Now, I know this is like, wow, that is super deep. But I think people don't realize, if you want people to do their job, and there's actually like a cultural thing to it as well. I mean, even if you're working with clients or you're working with maybe employees that are in another country, the last thing that people want to do is raise their hand and go, you know what, I didn't really understand what you said because my English isn't strong enough. Can you get an interpreter? Like that's I think there's a little bit of a stigma on there. There's a little bit like, especially if I've sold myself as like, oh, Patrick, don't worry, you can speak in English. I'm fine. And then I think there's important communication. So even the ability that if we were in a meeting right now and we were discussing something that's sort of heavy, I might like the ability to speak in my native language, say it's Spanish, Italian, whatever it is, just so I make sure that, Patrick, I get it right, because you and I are talking about something pretty heavy, right? So I know it seems like the most obvious thing in the world, but I think it has to be said, it has to be addressed. And I think, some of the things that we've been talking about with clients, I just had a meeting this afternoon with a very large organization, is that, hey, just try it. Figure out how to dip your toe in the water and see, you're going to see an improvement in engagement. It's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Thoughts? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I find it super interesting. I know you and I are both baseball fans, but it comes back to, I think, Yu Darvish a couple of years ago when he was on the Cubs. Someone asked him, they're like, hey, you've been in the States for a while now. Like, why do you still use an interpreter? He's like, well, because I'm more comfortable speaking Japanese. He's like, I know that like the back of my hand. He's like, it's a lot more time and energy and effort for me to speak English. He's like, when I have this other language that I've already got down forwards and backwards. So even though he's been in a climate where probably most of the players in day to day, I'm sure he's speaking bits of English with his teammates. When he gets in that formal setting of in the press room, he's like, okay, I need to speak in Japanese because that's where I know I have that right. He's like, I'm not gonna leave things to chance and try and speak English when I don't have full mastery yet.
Plus, his interpreter probably doesn't steal from him and bet on sports. So he's like, I got to keep this guy. No, I'm kidding. All right, that's another episode.
Different player, but yeah,
absolutely.
But yeah, I mean,
it's about comfort level. It was interesting, right? Yeah, new Pope yesterday, so we got to see him. He speaks a bunch of different languages, and of course, my ear was very tuned into his Italian, and I said his Italian was very much sort of like my Spanish. It's sort of Spitalian because he kept saying mundo instead of mundo, right? So I was like, oh, he's very much Spanish influence, but his Italian was really good. And he speaks English very well, obviously, because he's from Chicago. Apparently a Sox fan, discovered today.
There's a debate around that.
Yeah. One of his brothers said he's a Sox fan. But anyway, it was just interesting to see him. And I think that's sort of an olive branch. Like, look, I can speak English, I can speak Spanish, I can speak Italian. What is he looking for? He's looking for engagement, right? I mean, that's really the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, and when you think about it too, like if people were all comfortable speaking the same language, like there would be no need for language services at all. But that's clearly not the case, and we've seen year after year that the need and the want and the desire for language services just keeps going up and up and up. Like there's been no decline in that really over the last 5-10 years at least.
And again, we've done shows on this. We've talked about it so much, that I think, again, this is the place where I think people have to understand that AI is going to only help to spread this into more corners of the workplace, more corners of your everyday life. So translation and the need for translation is going to continue to rise. Humans are still very important to the process. The roles are just going to change. But I think another thing to think about is safety, right? So there was a number that we were able to get from OSHA that says that, hey, language barriers contribute to 25% of job-related accidents. That's huge. That's a really, really big number. There was another number from the Department of Labor that says Hispanic or Latino workers who often face language barriers have the highest fatality rate among all demographic groups at 4.6 fatalities per 100,000 full-time workers. That's a big number.
Yeah, and at that point, it's not. I mean, you can throw engagement out the window, sure, but in certain environments, safety is the number one thing on a work site, like at a job, and that's an interesting. Those are interesting stats to frame, like that. You might not think of language as a safety issue, but it can and is according to the stats that we're pulling out here.
Lastly, legal, right? Obviously, I know that the president has written some executive orders that have basically said that other languages don't exist. That's not what he said. But he said English is the official language and put some pressure on federal agencies essentially not to have to translate. And we saw some of the actions by immigration and such that the the whole edict that was passed down that if someone comes into an immigration office, speaks another language, you're not required to speak in anything other than English, which is interesting. And I'm sure there will be some legal challenges, but the Civil Rights Act is still here, obviously, and I think that there are going to be legal challenges. But I would think, hey, from a legal perspective, safety perspective, employee engagement and productivity, obviously, it makes a lot of sense to talk about this. So, why don't we talk a little bit about the rise of the multilingual workforce? Right? I mean, we see it every day, right, Patrick? I mean, whether you're going into a restaurant or you're going into a store, you see that there are a lot of people where English isn't their first language. And having done this for 30 years, it's really interesting. Our work has been very much tied to shifts in immigration. When I first started 30 years ago in Milwaukee, there was a huge migration of Russian Jews coming into Milwaukee. And this was a mass exodus from Russia, from the former Soviet Union. They were looking for religious freedoms, right? So Russian was huge, had to do it. Here in Glenview, we've seen a few, Glenview, Illinois, in the North Shore here of Chicago, we've seen over the years Korean, Russian, and now the latest is Mongolian. I know there's huge pockets in the country, Haitian Creole. Central Wisconsin, still Hmong is really, really popular. So, these waves of immigrants, of course, cause opportunity and challenges for our clients, right? So, opportunity in the fact that get this wonderful labor pool that they can now tap into. We're still near full employment in spite of everything. We're still near full employment in the United States. So it's important to attract and retain employees, and language access is really important.
Yeah, I think in a time too when workplaces are comparatively to the past, like struggling to keep their talent in place, I think it can be a competitive advantage to say like, hey, it doesn't matter what language you speak, like you'll still get the same information that everyone else gets, or the same opportunities, or fill in the blank. But I think that's a huge competitive advantage to say it doesn't matter what language you speak, we're still here to support you and make sure that you have what you need to do your job. And if you don't have that, I think that's could be a reason why someone leaves your workforce.
I mean, absolutely. And we joked a little bit about diversity and being a dirty word, and I'm not interested in the political debate. In my mind, I'm only focusing on the fact that, look at Costco, pretty big employer, right? They're embracing diversity in the sense that they're saying, hey, we enjoy the fact that in our workplace, we have people that have different, different backgrounds, different opinions, different life experience. It makes for a richer workplace, right? So, that's where I think really the focus is in terms of the rise of the workforce, the multilingual workforce, is just embracing that. And I think those that aren't are going to be left behind. You're going to have a much tighter labor pool. So anyway, I think that's interesting. Next topic was the risk of language gaps. So we talked a little bit how miscommunication can lead to safety issues and errors. Talked about legal compliance, but also how about employee morale and engagement due to lack of inclusion? Think of it. If you're having a meeting and you're sort of excluding half your workforce because they don't understand or don't communicate that they don't understand, that has to be rough, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think more broadly too, I've seen trends of just employee engagement and morale, like we talked about, kind of going down, and people are more open to looking for other opportunities. I feel like that's just kind of the macro thing that we're dealing with. So again, like to me, it's like, well, why wouldn't you engage language services to get your people more engaged? Like the cost of language services compared to that percentage of your workforce that you might keep, that's a drop in the bucket. That's a small investment that can really pay huge dividends if you roll out your program the right way.
We found an interesting number from Gallup that says companies with inclusive communication practices have 47% higher employee engagement. Again, kind of like really, like, yes, of course. I mean, it's a very obvious it's a very obvious statement that, hey, if you look for employee engagement, if you have inclusive communication, newsletters, policies, procedures, state of the company videos, and I think one of the things that I want to stress, and it dovetails into our next topic around translation services, is you don't have to take the highest level of service. You don't have to engage interpreters to be in your office 24/7. I mean, I always tell clients, start small. It's always easy to add to spend versus taking it away once the money's gone. If you decide, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to hire interpreters, and then you discover that the interpreters are sitting around a lot, well, that's money that's spent. Look for the small wins, look for that engagement, and go on. And I think we have some use cases, right, Patrick? I think we have some things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of subtitles for anything and everything. And I think now with how many video conferencing tools that are at our disposal, I think everything basically transcribes you live anyways. So taking that like one step further into transcription and then translation, or making it available, after the fact. You record that town hall meeting, you get the transcript, you polish it up because it's probably AI generated, ship it to a translation provider, and they'll ship you, translated subtitles right back. So then your workforce can watch that and say, you can have a pop up at the start that says pick your language, and then you can go through however many sets of subtitles you have, and they can still listen to it, in the language it was spoken, but then the subtitles will be translated for them. So I do that like even on Netflix and Hulu. Like I watch everything in English with subtitles, and I feel like it helps my comprehension and like having me pay attention to read and listen at the same time. And I think that's super valuable. And on the cost spectrum, that's lower cost. Like subtitles are much more economic than, like you said, like having on-site interpreters or doing full voiceover or whatever it might be. There's options at the lower side of the spend.
Absolutely. Like we talk about, oh gosh, we've been talking about this for years now, and on the podcast, is that there's a level of service that matches, number one, the level of risk you want to take, and the level of engagement you want to earn, right? So it's just finding that spend level, and I would suggest starting small, get a little engagement, get a win. And some of the things that you could look at are training programs, obviously things for safety protocols, equipment usage, ethics and policies.
All those things you have to do once a year for a couple hours.
Exactly.
Everyone knows what they are.
Exactly. Internal communications, right? Like emails, news, the newsletters, and intranet content. One of the big things we do, right, with our SharePoint connector is intranet content for employees, policies, procedures, and employee news, right? Those are the couple of Fortune 500 companies that we have that do that with us. And customer-facing materials like support scripts and marketing and packaging, and maybe a chat bot. You can turn on an AI-enabled chat bot for low-risk stuff, and of course, live interpretation. HR documents as well, contracts, handbooks, onboarding materials, pretty much all of that. And again, you don't have to do it all, but I think the big thing to think about is, like we mentioned from a safety perspective, you wouldn't want to release a safety procedure on how to drive a forklift in English if the folks that are driving the forklift don't speak English, right? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You release it in English and then you translate it in the languages that make sense for your team. We talked a little bit about seeing language access as a benefit to employees, but I think to the employer as well, right? I mean, what are some of the things that we can expect, Patrick? What are some of the gains that an employer are going to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe this is just me, but anytime I'm seeking a job, the first place I'll go after I see a posting on LinkedIn is go straight to Glassdoor and look at the open and honest reviews of a company. So I think you can find some good things on there, but some of them are like, this company is full of clicks or whatever. But if you see positive things like this company offers me content in my native language and things like that, like that's a huge differentiator for the workplace. And I'm sure you'll see applications go through the roof if you are having language access available to those who need it. I think that, like we talked about earlier, there's almost no negative to doing that. I think you just set yourself up to be that more attractive to the workforce.
Absolutely. I mean, the immigrant populations tend to be fairly tight knit. Number one, there's security in numbers, and I can tell you that as an employer, if you're doing a good job, obviously they're going to bring other people to the fore as well. It's like, oh, they're hiring, and you know what? They're very kind to, they're very kind to me. They provide language services. They make sure I understand everything. That's going to go a long way. And of course, the big things, right? Like being compliant with the EOC and OSHA and any other workforce and workplace regulations. I mean, think of it. If you handle chemicals and MSDSs, those need to be translated material safety data sheets. That all has to be translated. Obviously, you're going to have a stronger brand reputation as well, internally and externally, right?
That's in an era where a lot of people hide behind their keyboard and one-star Google reviews. So I think it's the old stat of, I forget where it came from exactly, but if someone is dissatisfied with something, they'll tell 10 people about it. But if they're satisfied, they'll tell like 2 or 3 people about it. Mm-hmm. So again, we want to have promoters, not detractors. So whatever way you can get more people talking about your company in a positive fashion, again, and language services compared to what value that brings is a relatively small investment to get, again, huge payoff for that.
Absolutely. And, we started to talk a little bit under the translation services heading, under that topic about the different things that a good language service provider can do. Technology has to be part of it, right, Patrick? I mean, it just wouldn't be a podcast unless we talked about AI these days. So let's give her a rip here and talk a little bit about AI and machine translation. I mean, it's a tool, but it's not a solution on its own, right? I just recently, like the whole thing that I've been in my more recent conversations about AI, a lot of people are looking sort of for a panacea where you say, hey, well, you use the AI. I love that. Like it's one thing. There's like Sam over in the corner. Hey, AI, how do we do this? Thinking it's like a Siri-like interaction, but there's so many levels of what we do and how AI works and how it functions and the use cases. But the one common thing that I'm trying to stress to clients is that in a place where you need consistency, sounds like employee handbooks, policies, procedures, AI on its own is somewhat useless. And the reason is because it's incredibly inconsistent. If you've ever played with AI, go ask it a question and then ask it again 10 minutes later. You're not going to get the same answer.
Tell it that it's wrong. Be like, no, your answer is wrong. And it'll be like, oh, you're right. I am wrong.
It's highly impressionable, right? So the point of the matter is that it's not consistent. However, when you marry AI with TM technology, right? So now what you're saying is, listen, I want you, the AI, Sam the AI. I guess I gave it Sam because of Sam Altman's name. Maybe, I don't know.
It's like Tom from MySpace.
There you go. Here's a body of translation that we've done over the last 10 years. Learn from it. Well, all right, now
go there first.
Exactly. So now you're setting precedents. Not only are you working with the AI so it answers in a more intelligent way, based on what you've done in the past, but you also take the job and run it against the translation memory. Because guess what? If you've already translated that sentence, why even ask the damn AI? Don't ask it, right? It doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Use what you've used in the past, then take what's left over and say, all right, now with this sort of trained AI, trained engine, if you will, now translate the difference. And that's a far better approach than, just whipping it at Google. Especially
I know we've talked about the triangle of constraints many times of cost, speed, and quality, and usually you get to pick 2 of those 3, and about 1% of the time you get all 3. But I think kind of picturing those as more radio dials in this example of, AI can dial up your speed, but it might dial down your quality. So again, those are the big 3 things anytime you're buying anything that really come into play. But specifically on language services, it's like you really do have to prioritize 1, maybe 2 of those. And that's just like how translation providers work, or language providers across, interpretation as well. But again, there's options that fit different use cases. And that's why I think the upfront is so important before you kick off a project. You really need to understand both provider and buyer of like, what are we trying to do, and how important is A, B, or C in what we're trying to do, as opposed to just, here's a document, I need it translated.
Yeah, that is so important, Patrick, because you always want to work backward from the business problem, right? I've been stressing that. We did a presentation with our colleague from EasyLing, Zalan, their chief solutions engineer, and one of the things we talked about is, again, AI for AI's sake isn't great, right? You want to start with the business problem and work backward. Here are the things that I need help with. It might be image detection. It might be, creating a string and then creating a translation. Well, that's more of a business workflow. Certainly AI has some places to interact there, but it's very, very important that you start from the business problem. I think that that's really the way to go. Speaking of which, Patrick, so let's say one of our listeners is, saying, oh, this sounds interesting. AI Patrick and AI Peter generated with Google's new podcast tool. How would I get started if I were to do this? What do I do? How do I start?
I would put out notes to a couple of translation providers. I know we've talked about in the past of making sure, like any interview process, you ask the same questions to all of the companies and see what you get back. I think being consistent from that standpoint is very important. I think equally important is seeing what kind of questions you get back from those providers in terms of clarifications, or, hey, did you think about this? Or did you consider that? Those are all really important. And then kind of validating providers based on that. But I know we've also talked at length too of, dipping your toe in the water and really just working on a pilot project, if nothing else, with the provider really gives you a good sense of how they operate and how that relationship will go.
I love that, Patrick. That's exactly right. It sounds like to communicate in a consistent way. Sounds like that's been a theme in our podcasts over the years, I think.
Maybe once or twice.
And I tell clients, I'm like, hey, if you're going to get your best out of it, there's the whole reason we started this podcast, right? Is how do I get the best out of my LSP or an LSP that I plan to hire? And I think doing a deep language access audit is really important, especially if we're in a bigger organization. My guess is you're thinking, man, do I have the problems related to language? How do I figure this out? I guarantee you, if you had that conversation in the lunchroom or the virtual lunchroom or wherever anyone hangs out in today's workplace, you would find other people that are having language issues as well. So I think what you do is you get a mandate, whether it's from procurement or whether it's from, a director, to say, hey, I'd like to do a little bit of an audit and see who else has problems with translations. Figure out who else, because now, guess what? On a united front, a couple of things. You're going to be able to work better consistently across the whole organization. You're going to get more buying power. Because here's the thing, if you leverage volume with a language service provider, that's going to really help you get a better price. It just makes sense, like anything, right? So find out who needs it. Then find out what documents they need, what types of documents, what sort of systems they're going to connect to. Do they need interpretation? Because HR typically is going to need interpretation, especially if you have a multilingual workforce. So do we need telephonic interpretation? Get those things all listed as, here's the scope, here are the things we need. Get some sample documents. Get an NDA signed from the 3 providers that you're going to talk to and say, here are all the departments that need help. Here's all the documents and services that they need. Give me sample pricing on these documents. Give me sample pricing on what an interpretation arrangement or agreement looks like. And now you compare the 3 and you've got leverage. I think that's my best suggestion that I can provide.
Yeah, I would say too, and I skipped right to the last point of that question, provider evaluation. But I think talking through your priorities as well with your providers is important. A phrase I've heard a lot in my new role is that some people like to try to boil the ocean, which I think is a similar thing that happens in the language service space as well. But you're trying to do too much right away before you've kind of proved out that it actually works. So I think prioritizing, like you said, those high value things that need to be done, and then kind of layering in those nice to haves is another important one. But I think that to me all boils into like whether it's the buyer or the translation provider, you need to have some sort of translation strategy. You can't just say, here's a bunch of documents, go do them, don't talk to me ever, and just have your provider kick them right back to you. I know we talked about solving the business case, but it's like, okay, what's important at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months this year for what we need to have done? And really then going backwards and seeing what that means in terms of translation is my best advice there.
Absolutely. Patrick, I know we're at the mark here. So some closing thoughts, I think. A question that I would ask, it's rhetorical because I wish you could all respond, but you can't. Are you really communicating with every member of your team? And when I say really communicating, I'm stressing really. So are you really getting through? Are you getting the engagement that you want to have? And I think that's the most important question. Ask yourself that. And if the answer is no, or I'm not sure, pick up the phone, find an LSP. Certainly the one that's on this podcast would be happy to chat with you, but find someone you trust. And really just, we've talked about this all the time. Language should not be a barrier. It shouldn't be a block. It should be a bridge. You should be able to have rich communication with all of your employees, regardless of their language. It's all within the realm of possibility, even more so today than it ever has been in the past. So with that, Mr. Patrick, what's your biggest takeaway from today?
Yeah, I think I've said it a few times and I'll say it again, like why you're using language services is important. Just doing it to check a box or without really being intentional about it, I think is a big miss. So really taking the time and effort and energy, and I know no one wants to hear that, but I think if you sink that initial time and effort in upfront and put together a really strong strategy, you will see those dividends down the road rather than just doing translation for translation's sake. I think it is a huge miss.
I would agree. Just throwing money at the problem isn't the way to do it. That I'm going to dovetail off your takeaway, Patrick. I think that's exactly correct. This has to be measured, has to be planned, and the only reinforcement I would add that I know I've talked about here today and other podcasts is start small, get some wins. Show management that, hey, look, this was good. We have some engagement here. We've got some wins. How do we proceed? Do we have budget to proceed forward? And just work closely and honestly with your LSP. And if that doesn't feel right, then you're probably with the wrong LSP. So keep looking. So wonderful, easy for me to say. So for this episode of Translation Confidential, this is Peter and Patrick signing off.